Hello everyone, I am Molegion, and in this video I would like to talk about Homecoming update for Gwent. I would like to share my opinion with you because plenty of people already shared their opinion with the community, and I can start by saying that I actually enjoy Homecoming. I like it. I think it's a very good version of Gwent and it has a lot of potential. However, it doesn't mean it's flawless. I think that it has some problems, but and in this video I would like to talk about the problems and about the solutions that I have for them. I think some of them are really good, and I hope that they will be taken into consideration by CDPR game designers. So yeah, let's begin without waiting. The first problem I would like to talk about is the prevalence of control in the meta. Right now the best decks in the meta are control decks because control tools are just super strong, and I mean it's hard to be surprised that people actually prefer to play decks like Ifne control or Crack control. And I think it's caused by several things. The first thing is that after Homecoming, one important thing in the game mechanics changed, and it's that you can take multiple actions before playing a card. So you can use your orders on Ifne, orders on Krach, on Mastercrafted Spear, whatever, and then you can play a special card like Scorch, Epidemic, Wolfsbane, stuff like that. So I think that what's particularly problematic is Scorch and Wolfsbane. Generally the cards that have very high ceiling of the value they can get. So yeah, because of this change, the control tools, the control cards are very strong, and generally the archetype is the control archetype in general is just overpowered. And I think that yeah, I'm a big fan of control decks, but at the moment they are just very problematic because I believe that in a healthy metagame, control deck is never better than the best non-control deck overall. Like the tier 1 shouldn't be dominated by control decks. So yeah, also the fact that there are a lot of good neutral tools that are also part of control. Basically there's cards like Scorch, Epidemic, Wolfsbane, they're all neutral, so it's really easy to put them into any deck pretty much. Also, the damaging effects are equally costed that boost effects are. For example, if you take a look at the Wolfpack, it's 2 points deal 2 damage for 5 provision cost. If you take a look at Peasant Militia, it's 2 but boost by 2. And Wolfpack is just much better because dealing damage is so much stronger in Homecoming. Since there's a lot of engines that have not many points because units are smaller. So yeah, that together with the first point brings the conclusion that control is just too strong in current meta. In my opinion, there's two good ways to solve the issue of big control being so dominant. And the first one, the one that I like the most, and I would like to credit Shaggy and Gwentown for that one, because they were the people who first told me about it, is introducing a new keyword. I called it initiative here. It could be called in any other way, it doesn't really matter. Basically, the keyword would mean that the card ability only works if you play it as first action during your turn. Of course, it has the bad side of being quite confusing for new players at the beginning, but we can get reused to everything, so same as playing cards on the wrong row, right? I think this is not actually a big problem. So what it solves, it basically brings some cards. I'm not saying that all control cards should get this keyword, but it brings some cards to their state from before Homecoming. Basically, in previous Gwent, your opponent had the last say before you played Scorch on him, right? And I believe that's how it should work, because personally, as a Gwent player, as a competitive player, I always enjoyed playing around Scorch. I think it was a fun minigame. inside the Gwent match, and it also added some skill to the game, right? You had to plan your game to not play into Scorch. It punished you for making mistakes and stuff. Now sometimes you feel like you don't really you don't really care bother playing around Scorch, because they can ping something 4 times and line it up anyway. So basically, if Scorch and Epidemic had this keyword, players would have the way to play around cards like Epidemic, cards like Scorch. I don't think all the cards should get it. Like, if cards become problematic, they could get this keyword, sure. But for example, Wolfsbane, I mentioned it earlier as a strong control tool. I don't think it's that bad overall, and it's also getting nerfed in the December patch in some other way, so no need to bother. But this introduction of this keyword also opens up a lot of design space for future. Like, you can add some cards without thinking what will happen if a player can take multiple actions before playing a card, right? You don't have to worry about it. So yeah, I think this is a great idea. I'm not sure how hard it is to implement, but I think it's really worth a consideration. And it actually brings up the it's similar to how Marigold's Hailstorm was nerfed in beta. Some of you guys probably remember Marigold's Hailstorm was a card that basically halved power of all units in a row, and it was never a problem. Like, nobody played it pretty much. It wasn't that strong until there was a change in game mechanics. Golds lost their immunity, so Marigold's Hailstorm started hitting gold units, and therefore every single deck started playing Marigold's Hailstorm because it was so good. So what CDPR did, they decided to make Hailstorm hit only bronze and silver units, so it basically works the same way it did before the fundamental change in game mechanics, and it was still played in some movement decks, but it wasn't that oppressive in the meta. So this is basically how this solution works, right? It brings some cards to the previous state, and it opens up some design space for future. And the other solution would be to reevaluate how strong damaging cards are, because I think that in general damaging cards should have higher cost than boosting cards, because damaging is just worth even more, especially in the meta where we have a lot of order and stuff that has to stick to the board to work. The next thing I would like to talk about are artifacts, and at first I would like to say that I don't think artifacts on their own are a problem. Like, they have a lot of flaws, and there's a lot of things that makes them bad, like bleeding. They are bad in short rounds and stuff, but the problem is you can't really effectively use these strategies against artifact decks, because you can't really bleed a deck that plays Epidemic for 30 points, Scorch for 30 points, stuff like that, right? So yeah, it's kind of connected to the previous point. I think if you solve some control cards, artifacts are smaller of a problem. However, people dislike the fact that they are uninteractive, and yeah, while I don't see a big problem with them once control is a little bit nerfed. I have some ideas on how to make them more interactive and more fun to play against. So maybe here I will start talking about the solution that is considered by CDPR, but I think it's bad, and I hope it won't be released. And that solution is giving armor to artifacts. So I think that kind of like this basically makes artifacts 0-point units with armor, right, to destroy them. So it makes a lot of things that are bad for the game. Like, for example, it makes the artifact removal generally useless, right? The cards would have to be reworked, because there's just no point to risk playing artifact removal when you can play general removal for any engine. And yeah, the other bad thing about it is that if everybody runs removal to counter artifacts, engines suffer more, right? Like right now, engines are not even that played because of prevalence of control. But if everybody will play Azure Standard or whatever to remove artifacts, then engines just suffer for no reason. So I dislike this idea. However, I think that what could be nicely used to make artifacts more interactive is weather, and I mean bronze weather in general. Weather is in a pretty bad state at the moment. It's pretty useless. It costs 8, and it's at 8 points effectively, right? So what if artifacts had reach, like Sickle would have reach 2, or Spear had reach 2, or whatever, and what if the bronze weather effects would be also counters to artifacts. For example, fog could not only do 2 damage per turn, but also limit reach of an artifact by 1, or maybe reach of all units. So that depends, of course, that needs some balancing, but let's talk about artifacts now. If it limited reach by 1, if Frost maybe added an extra turn of cooldown, because you know it's cool and Frost to the artifacts, I think that's a nice idea, and that also makes weather more playable. A White Frost could be reworked into a card that costs, for example, 15 provisions, and it does spawn Frost on 2 rows for your opponent, and Frost would have interaction with artifacts, right? So, but it has to be like really expensive. I mean, otherwise it's very strong. And yeah, also the other benefit of that is that weather doesn't actually tick if there's no unit in a row. So if they want to activate their artifacts, like remove the bad condition from them, they need to play a unit there. So I think this is a nice area to experiment with. I'm not saying it's ideal, but I think it's something worth considering, and it would also make weather more playable. The third problem I would like to talk about is the current Molegion system, and I must say that at first I really liked it. I was a fan of the idea that different leaders have different number of Molegions, so you balance them around it. But I must say that the more I play, the more I think it's not good, because the main problem with giving leaders different number of Mulligans is that you don't, like, okay, leaders have different power levels, right? That's the idea. If their leader is stronger, you want to give it more Mulligans, but you don't harm the leader's Mulligans by I mean, you don't harm the power of the leader by taking away a Mulligan from him. You make him more vulnerable to something that is not even dependent on the player. You make it more vulnerable to bad starting hand, to bad draws, to stuff like that. So for example, if you play like Hansel and John Calvit, it really sucks for you, right? Because you have 2 Mulligans and sometimes you will draw badly and it feels horrible. You can't do anything about it because you just drew your brooch or whatever, bad cards, and you have to spend all your Mulligans and you basically don't have Mulligans. So, and look at what leaders are the most dominant leaders in the meta right now. It's Ifne. I mean, Ifne is busted on her own, but it has a lot of Mulligans. Krach has a lot of Mulligans. Fortes has a lot of Mulligans. Basically, the leaders that are played are the ones with the most Mulligans, right? Because people really value consistency. And it's really sad, because other leaders like Hansot, John Calvit, Emir, those are really interesting leaders, and I wish they would see more play. So yeah, it rewards you for having a good starting hand and punishes you for not having having a bad hand. And I think that's a problem. But of course, for every problem there is a solution. My solution for this problem would be to give leaders the same number of Mulligans, similarly to the way it was before. Maybe it should be a Mulligan bank, maybe not. I'm not sure yet. I think Mulligan bank can be fine. if they have the same number of mulligans, because no leader should be punished for getting bad starting hand, right? So actually that that means that probably mulligan bank is not a great idea, and you should have fixed number of mulligans between rounds, maybe 2 per round or something like that. But we still have the problem that some leaders might be more powerful than the other ones. The leaders might be more synergistic to other leaders. So I think that the best way to do that would be to balance them would be make their provision cap different. Like, I think the provision system is absolutely best thing that happened to Gwent in Homecoming. It's awesome. It makes deck building really complex, compelling, and it's really fun to build decks even if they are bad. But I think that there's potential to use this system even more. Like, it doesn't have to be a big difference. It can be five provision difference for stronger leaders. For example, if you want to play a highly synergistic leader with your deck, like Araka's Queen, for example, you will also have less power in your cards because you have to be more careful with your provision cost, but you won't be screwed by bad starting hands. And that's not the point, right? We don't want a game when the game is decided in the mulligan phase or whatever. The same way we didn't want a game that is decided during the coin flip. So I think that Pavel Burza said today that that he doesn't really like the idea. I think it was a podcast by Corvach, a Brazilian channel. He said he doesn't like the idea, but I mean, I don't blame him, because that the question came out like pretty randomly, and he didn't have time to analyze it, of course, because it was live. But I think it's not really that bad. Like, you really have to find the sweet spot for how many provision points can you go down or up to make the leaders balanced. And this is something that directly affects the power level of your deck. Like, you actually need to play different cards if you want to use a specific leader, and you don't get screwed by RNG, right? That's not what we want. If we can limit the drawing RNG and stuff like that, then why not do it, right? It's not fun for anyone. It doesn't make the games more interesting. But anyway, that would be it for this video. It's already quite long. Of course, there are some smaller issues that I see with specific cards and stuff, but those three are the three most important ones probably, and I hope the ideas will be considered. Tell me what you know about it. Either you can message me on Discord, you can leave the comment under the video, and I hope this video will bring some discussion, and we will figure out together what would be the best way to solve those issues. Because Gwent is fun. Overall, it's fun. I'm having a lot of fun. I think it's a cool game, and I really love it. I hope it will succeed. But of course, it just released a huge patch, so it has some issues. Anyway, that would be it. Thank you guys for watching, and see you some other time.